Welcome to Through the Bible with Pastor Michael, a podcast from First Baptist Church in Mustang, Oklahoma. Here's Pastor Michael.
September day 3, starting a new book of the Bible today as we go back to the Old Testament to read and study through the book of Esther. Won't take us long to go through Esther. We'll just spend today and then the next 2 days as Esther has 10 chapters, and so it'll be pretty quick going through it. But an interesting book of the Bible, interesting history, interesting details about things that are taking place there in the Persian Empire. The most fascinating thing to me about the book of Esther is it's the only book that doesn't mention God by name, and yet you see the providence of God all the way through it. And so while it has this unique distinction of being the only book of the Bible that doesn't mention the Lord directly, what you do see is how His hand of providence is entirely behind the entire story. Of course, Esther has the very well-known verse that she was there for such a time as this. A verse that's often referenced to consider the reality that the Lord raises up people in His providence, in His will, according to His wisdom. That regardless of the day in which we live, it's always true that the Lord is accomplishing His purposes. The Lord knows exactly why He has you living today, right where you live, right in this time that you live. I get frustrated when people talk about, this is a bad time to be alive, or when people talk about, the good old days. Look, here's the reality of it. Life always has challenges. Life always has struggles. And for God's people, there are always days of blessing and days of opposition. That's always true. But it comes down to this. The Lord sovereignly placed you here right now. Your children, your grandchildren, they're all here right now. If He would have wanted you to be alive at a different time, a different era, He would have and could have done that. But just as we read about in Esther, I think it's fair to say each of us as God's people ought to take heart in knowing the Lord has us here right now to accomplish His will and His purposes in this time in our life. And so there's no reason for us to go through life worrying about the day in which we live, in the sense of what life would have been better if we'd have been born 30 years earlier, or 100 years earlier, 500 years earlier. The Lord for you in your life has you purposefully, sovereignly here right now to accomplish His purpose and His reasons in this day. And I think as we go through Esther, we see that reality very clearly. And again, as the scripture says for her, she was there for such a time as this. As Christians, we take heart to know that we too are created by God, made in His image, fashioned by His hand, and born at the exact day that for His purpose and His will for our life in our generation, that we could be faithful to Him. So with that in mind, here in these opening chapters, a few observations. Number one, King Ahasuerus throws a feast that lasts 180 days for his officials, which leads us, number two, that the king calls for Queen Vashti to appear and show her beauty, but she refused to do it. Number three, we meet Mordecai, who is raising Esther, known also as Hadassah, and because she has no father and no mother. The fourth observation as the story begins to unfold is that Esther is then chosen to be queen. And we find out a fifth thing in our reading today, that Haman conceived a plot to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. And so here in these early chapters, we've got some names: King Ahasuerus, Queen Vashti, Mordecai, Esther, Haman. These are the main characters in the plot that we track in these 10 chapters of Esther. So let's look at some applications for us. Number one, the thirst to showcase power leads to foolish decisions. This is a bit of a repeat as we see something like that so often. In so much of our reading this year, it's come back to the problems of pride, the lust of power and authority, when handled in an ungodly way, does so much damage and so much harm. And for us, we want to recognize that if our desire is just to showcase our power, our authority, or perceived power, that leads to really foolish decisions. The second application: God's providence is working in ways we cannot see. This really is the part of the Christian life to me that just brings me so much comfort. When we say providence, we're talking about how God is orchestrating the events of our life to accomplish and achieve His purposes. We distinguish providence from miracles. Miracles would be God intervening and breaking the natural order. You can't walk on water, and so for Jesus to walk on water, that's a miracle. It's changing the natural order of things. For a dead person to be brought back to life, that's a miracle because it demands breaking the natural order. When we talk about providence, though, we're not talking about miracles. We're talking about the Lord orchestrating events. And I would propose to you that when God's people have the eyes to look around and see the acts of providence, that should be so faith building and affirming. Now, I don't need a bunch of miracles in my life because I have the providence of God to encourage me and to comfort me. Now, as I just mentioned a moment ago, God's providence is working in ways we can't see. We read providence backwards. You can't know providence in the moment. You look back and you say, that was the Lord at work. You look back and say, this is what the Lord was doing. This is how the Lord was using this trial in my life. This is how the Lord was using this person in my life to bless me, to shape me. This is how the Lord was using this blessing in my life to allow me the chance to be able to help and serve and bless others. And so we want to be people who recognize God's providence, but that's typically done by looking backwards and seeing how God has superintended the events of our life for His glory. The third application: we need to step in the gap to help people without family. We see that in even just looking at Mordecai and Esther. And so in our world too, and within our churches, there are people who may not have a mother, may not have a father, and we need as God's people to step in and fill in the gap for them. That's why it's so important in the church that there are godly women and godly men who are teaching children. For example, in our children's ministries in our churches, I thank the Lord for every godly lady who teaches and every godly woman who serves there. Absolutely 100% essential. At the same time, our churches also need men to teach our children, because we've got so many children in our communities who don't have fathers, don't have dads at home, and they need to know what a godly man looks like. You've got so many young boys who don't have a godly father in their life, and so they need godly father figures in their life to help show them what a man of God looks like. And so one of the things we want to do in our churches, and an application for us of what we're reading today, is say, how can we fill in the gap for people who don't have families? We looked just recently in 1 Timothy about the church's role in serving and providing for widows that don't have family. We see in our reading today what it looks like to be a fill-in and fill the gap for someone who doesn't have mom or dad. And so I think our application is we want to always be on the lookout to say, how can we be a blessing to people and serve them according to their need? A third application we need is, fourth application is that discrimination and prejudice are terrible things and bring shameful actions. Just as we read about today, it's true in our world today, where there is discrimination and prejudice. Those are terrible things, and they bring about shameful actions. We need to avoid that. And then, fifthly, wicked schemes often come back to injure the one who schemed them. We don't want to be a part of seeking revenge. We don't want to be a part of wicked schemes and plans. Um, love people, serve people, give your life to people. Let the Lord take care of if someone's done wrong. Let the Lord take care of settling that score. You don't need to do it. We don't want to be a part of wicked schemes. And so often when people are, those schemes come back to injure them, just as we see in the book of Esther. And then a summary from Psalm 119, 81 to 96. God's power and authority knows no limit. God's power, His authority, His word, His control of the universe, His might, all of it is limitless, which is why He's able to work acts of providence to accomplish His will and His purpose, because He has full power, full authority, and His word is sure, and His word will come to pass.